On October 12, 1953, a passenger jet broke apart in the sky over India, and nobody on the ground had any idea why. It was not the first time this had happened. It would not be the last. Investigators combed through wreckage scattered across miles of jungle and farmland. They had bent metal. They had scorched fabric. They had grieving families demanding answers. What they did not have was a single clue about what happened in the final seconds before the aircraft came apart. There was no way to know what the pilot said. No way to know what the instruments showed. No way to know if it was human error, mechanical failure, or something no one had ever seen before. The plane could not talk, and so, for a while, neither could the truth. This is the story of the device built to solve that problem. A device so tough it can survive a fireball, a 1,000-foot fall, and weeks at the bottom of the ocean. A device most people will never see, will never touch, and hope to never need. A device that is not black and is not really a box. This is the history of the black box. To understand why the black box had to be invented, you have to understand what flying was like before it existed. By the early 1950s, aviation had entered the jet age. Airplanes were flying faster, higher, and farther than ever before. The de Havilland Comet, built in Britain, was the world's first commercial jetliner. It looked like the future. It flew like the future. Passengers marveled at how smooth and fast it was, compared to the propeller planes that came before it. Then the comets started falling out of the sky. In 1954 alone, 2 comets broke apart in mid-air within months of each other. Investigators were desperate. They pulled wreckage out of the Mediterranean Sea, piece by piece, reassembling the aircraft like a broken vase, hoping the shape of the damage would tell them what words could not. Eventually, they traced the disasters to metal fatigue around the plane's square window frames, a problem nobody had understood because nobody had ever built a pressurized jet cabin before. But here is the uncomfortable truth. They got lucky. They found enough wreckage in a place shallow enough to search, to eventually piece together the cause. Most crash investigators were not so fortunate. Planes came down in oceans, mountains, and jungles, and the only witnesses were dead. Engineers were left guessing. Airlines were left grounding fleets based on theories instead of evidence. Passengers were left wondering if the skies were simply less safe than anyone wanted to admit. Something had to change. Not the planes. The problem was bigger than any single design flaw. The problem was that airplanes had no memory. The person who solved this problem was not a famous engineer working for a major aircraft manufacturer. He was a chemist working in a research laboratory in Melbourne, Australia, and he came to the idea from an unusual angle: grief. His name was David Warren. When David Warren was a boy, his father died in one of the earliest fatal air crashes in Australian history. Decades later, Warren was working at Australia's aeronautical research laboratories, investigating why a new jet aircraft, the Comet, kept crashing. He was in the room during discussions about the disasters, listening to engineers admit, again and again, that without eyewitnesses, they were simply speculating. Warren had recently seen one of the first miniature pocket recorders, a novelty gadget for dictating notes, and he had an idea that seemed almost too obvious once he said it out loud. What if you put a recorder on the plane itself? Not to record music or memos, but to capture the instrument readings and the voices in the cockpit, continuously, on a loop, so that if something went wrong, investigators would have a witness that could not lie, could not panic, and could not die. He called his early device the Flight Memory Unit. Nobody wanted it. Warren pitched the idea to Australian aviation authorities and airlines, and the response was, at best, indifference. As some airline officials were openly hostile to it, pilots, in particular, were uneasy. A machine that recorded everything said in the cockpit felt less like a safety tool and more like a spy planted by management, something that could be used to blame them after the fact, rather than protect them beforehand. One senior official reportedly told Warren that no pilot would ever accept flying with a spy in the cockpit. For years, the device that would eventually save countless lives sat mostly ignored in Australia, treated as a curiosity rather than a necessity. What finally changed the recorder's fate was not persuasion. It was a visit from abroad. In 1958, a British aviation official visiting the Australian laboratory saw a demonstration of Warren's device and immediately understood what Warren's own countrymen had missed. This was not a surveillance tool. It was a way to finally give crash investigators a source of truth. Word spread. The device was built into a working prototype and demonstrated more widely. British and American manufacturers began developing their own versions. By the early 1960s, flight recorders had gone from a rejected curiosity to something governments were beginning to require. In 1960, Australia became one of the first countries in the world to mandate flight data recorders on commercial aircraft, following a mysterious crash where investigators once again had wreckage but no answers. The United States and other countries soon followed with their own mandates. The device that almost nobody wanted became, within a decade, something no commercial aircraft would be allowed to fly without. Here is where the object's popular name becomes almost a joke against itself. The black box is not black, and modern aircraft actually carry two of them. The recorders are painted a bright, unmistakable international orange, specifically so they can be spotted quickly in wreckage, water, snow, or dense vegetation. The exact origin of the name black box is debated. Some aviation historians trace it to the early prototypes, which had dark casings or were housed in blackened, scorched metal after tests. Others link it to a broader engineering habit of calling any self-contained instrument with mysterious internal workings a black box, regardless of its actual color, because operators only cared about what went in and what came out, not what happened inside. Whatever the origin, the name stuck long after the color did not. And there are, in fact, two separate devices doing two separate jobs. The first is the Flight Data Recorder, or FDR. It continuously logs technical information about the aircraft: altitude, airspeed, heading, engine performance, control positions, and dozens, sometimes hundreds of other parameters, many times per second. The second is the Cockpit Voice Recorder, or CVR. It captures sound from microphones in the cockpit, the pilot's conversations, radio communications, alarms, and ambient noise like engine sounds or a cabin door closing. Together, the FDR tells investigators what the aircraft did. The CVR tells them what the crew said, heard, and reacted to. Combined, they can often reconstruct a plane's final minutes, almost like a screenplay. If a recorder is going to be useful, it has to survive precisely the event it is meant to explain. That requirement shaped the recorder's design into one of the most brutally over-engineered objects in modern aviation. Modern recorders are built to withstand an impact force of 3,400 times the force of gravity. They are designed to survive a fire burning at over 1,000 degrees Celsius for a full hour. They must endure being submerged in seawater at ocean floor pressure for weeks, sometimes months, while search teams locate them. Engineers test them by firing them from air cannons into steel targets, baking them in industrial furnaces, crushing them under thousands of pounds of static weight and dropping them from height onto hardened surfaces, again and again, until the design proves it can take damage that would destroy almost anything else on the aircraft and keep its data intact. Inside that rugged shell sits a stack of memory chips, protected by multiple layers of insulation and a hardened steel or titanium casing. Many modern recorders also include an underwater locator beacon, a small device that begins emitting an acoustic ping the moment it senses submersion, a signal that can be detected by search equipment even at depths of several miles for around 30 days before the battery runs out. Everything about the object is a bet against catastrophe. It is built on the assumption that the worst possible thing has already happened, and its only job now is to outlast it. The black box has changed the outcome of some of the most significant investigations in aviation history, often turning years of speculation into a matter of weeks, and sometimes days. Investigators do not simply pull the recorder out of the wreckage and press play. Recovered units are handled with the same care as a fragile archaeological find. Specialists in dedicated laboratories carefully dry out water damage, stabilize corroded circuit boards, and in the most severe cases, physically remove memory chips from a melted or crushed casing to read the data directly, one damaged fragment at a time. It can take a team of engineers days just to safely extract a recording before the actual investigation into its contents even begins. Once the data is recovered, it is often combined into a single timeline. Every control input from the data recorder, lined up second by second against every word and sound from the voice recorder. Investigators can watch an entire final flight unfold almost like a transcript, matching an alarm sound on the CVR to the exact altitude reading on the FDR at that same instant. This reconstruction has, in numerous cases, revealed mechanical failures that were completely invisible from the wreckage alone, prompting global fleet-wide inspections and design changes that prevented future accidents from the same cause. In other cases, recorders cleared crews of blame that had initially been assumed by the public or the press, giving grieving families a version of events grounded in evidence instead of speculation. In cases involving hijackings or deliberate acts, recorders provided the only surviving record of what actually occurred in the aircraft's final moments, information that went on to shape not just aviation safety policy, but international law. But the recorder's most famous limitation came in 2014, when a commercial flight vanished over the Indian Ocean. And despite one of the most extensive and expensive search operations in aviation history, spanning years and covering vast stretches of remote ocean floor, the recorders were never recovered. The world was reminded, painfully, that the black box only works if it can be found, and that locating a small object at the bottom of a vast, deep ocean remains one of the hardest physical problems in modern search and rescue, harder in some ways than building the recorder itself. That single case pushed the aviation industry to rethink an assumption it had relied on for 60 years, that a physical box, eventually recovered, would always be enough. New international requirements followed, extending how long underwater locator beacons could keep transmitting and pushing airlines towards systems that stream key flight data to satellites in real time. The idea is no longer just to build an indestructible box. It is to make sure that even if the box itself is never found, a copy of what it knew already exists somewhere else, far from the wreckage. Despite everything riding on it, the black box is physically, almost aggressively unglamorous. It has no display, no buttons for a passenger to press, no visible presence in the cabin at all. It is usually bolted into the tail section of the aircraft, chosen specifically because the tail tends to survive impacts better than the nose or the fuselage's midsection. absorbing less of the initial force in most crash geometries. Pilots do not think about it during a normal flight, in the same way a driver does not think about their car's airbags on an ordinary commute. Airline maintenance crews check it during routine inspections, confirm it is recording, and otherwise leave it alone. Passengers walk past the very back of the cabin thousands of times over the years, without ever knowing that a device engineered to survive almost anything is sitting quietly a few feet beneath their seat. That is, in a strange way, the entire point of good safety engineering. The best safety systems are the ones you never have to think about, because they are simply always working in the background. And the black box has spent more than 60 years being exactly that, invisible, until the one moment it becomes the only thing that matters. David Warren spent much of his career largely unrecognized for what he had built. Australia was slow to credit him, and for decades his invention was more celebrated overseas than in his home country. It was only later in his life that Australia formally honored him for the device, decades after airlines around the world had already made it mandatory equipment. He died in 2010, and Qantas, Australia's national airline, marked his passing by putting an inscription on one of its aircraft, Mr. Flight Data Recorder. It is a strange kind of legacy. Most passengers who board a modern aircraft have no idea his name exists, let alone that a grieving son of a crash victim built the device that has, over decades, helped explain what happened in nearly every serious aviation accident since. Today, every time a commercial aircraft pushes back from the gate, two small orange boxes begin quietly recording everything, waiting, hoping to never be needed. Most flights land safely, and the data inside those boxes is simply overwritten, flight after flight, an endless loop of ordinary, uneventful moments nobody will ever listen to. But on the rare occasions when something goes wrong, those two boxes become the only witnesses left. Silent, orange, nearly indestructible, and built entirely on one uncomfortable idea, that if the worst happens, someone should still be able to find out why.